Good evening and welcome to this evening's conversation. I mean, it's another year, Black History Month, and as we do it at Eagle, we bring together our friends to sort of have a conversation about things that are important to us as members of the Black community and things that we feel can inspire us, motivate us, and help us to be better citizens of the Black community. So if I can say that, but I would like to start by introducing, we've got Choma here, a great friend of ours, Choma from Kantar.
Yes.
Yeah. And we've got Gift, who always reminds us when we mention it.
Like a present.
Yes. Gift from Beano Studios.
Thank you.
We've got Keziah, another friend of the agency from Meta. And we've got Wesley from Marks and Spencer. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Very balanced panel that we have this evening. Yeah. I think the reason why we decided to have this conversation, at a time like this is because whenever it comes to Black History Month, there's always this conversation about, is it important? Is it necessary? Why do we only just take 1 month to celebrate Black history? Can't we do it all year round and all that? And also then there's a narrative about it's very Americanized, So for us, African Caribbeans in the United Kingdom, those of us born and bred here and all that, we feel we are not part of this whole story when you talk about Black history. So I think tonight's conversation, we would want to allow you guys to share your story, your journey, probably delve into some things that inspired you. We know you all going into the creative sector. Now, this is an area that's very passionate to us because year on, we know that inclusion, diversity, and all the conversations happening. But when it comes to the creative sector, the marketing and PR and all that sector, we still don't see representation, especially rising up. So at the start of a year, we see a rush of talent from all backgrounds rushing into the industry. But then 2 years, 3 years down the line, we find that they've always kind of fizzled out. But at least on this panel tonight, we've got 2 people who have been in there for quite a bit of time, and we're going to delve into that story. And super excited to have also Choma and Gift as rising in this sector, so we can be able to pick on your minds some of the challenges, some of the hurdles, some of the things that you think need to happen in the sector to encourage those that are coming after you to be part of the sector. So technically, this is what tonight's conversation is about. So just to set the premise right. But I think maybe I'll just kickstart by just asking that as people from African, Caribbean, Black British heritage background, can you, each of you, share how that background has influenced, in a way, who you are today? Because we're in a society where, obviously, even though we know we have our heritage, we are also being submerged in another culture, in another. So I'm not sure whether you can share something about home upbringing, parenting, whether there were any sort of touches of the culture from where you guys came from in any of that. So maybe the thing is, this is an open conversation. We can ask ourselves questions also. It's yeah. So,
I mean, look, I can start.
Yeah.
I think for me, being African is who I am.
Yeah.
So I always say, and obviously the role that I have now,
Yeah.
so is the past 5-6 years that I've looked after the Africa continent. Before that, I used to look after UK, Canada, US, kind of internationally. And I always say to people, don't be fooled by the accent.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I've got a British accent, I put my hands up, but I'm very African, right? So my thought process, how I think, even I purposely chose that I wanted to move and focus more on the continent. Because for me, what I was seeing was the same old cliche, like, we're going to go and help Africa, let's go and build wells, but I was just like, look, I've got family and friends who are living much better lives in Africa than I'm living here. So, and there's amazing stories to tell about the people from the continent, the businesses that are being done, the innovation. So for me, I think being African, being Ghanaian that's me, right? So that's always going to be part of my heritage. That's always going to be how I think. Right. That's how I approach certain things as well. So, when you ask that question, I always find it a bit kind of strange in terms of, how do you feel being Black British? Yeah. Because, my passport says I'm British, but as soon as they see my name, I'm not British, right? And I know that. Yeah. But for me, that's okay. But I know that I have the best of both worlds. I'm in a culture where, to a certain extent, I can get more opportunities. But I'm in another culture as well that's so rich in heritage, and it's so rich in, like, you know, the different tribes, so everything that we have, the foods, everything. So for me, you know, I would always, when someone asks where I'm from, the first answer is always Ghana. Because if I say I'm from Britain, they're like, no, but where are you really from? And I think a lot of people get that, right? Especially when you're black. You can say, oh, I'm from Britain. It's like, no, but where?
Yeah.
So it's, for me, it's acknowledging first and foremost that I am African. My thoughts is what has shaped me to this day. Like my parents, you know, my upbringing, all of that kind of stuff.
Well, that's me.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Where were you born?
I was born in the UK, actually.
And I'm asking the question for a reason. And
Yeah.
Come out in the end. And when you go to Ghana, and they ask you, would they ask you when you go to Ghana where you're from?
No, because they'll know, because I can speak the language. Even though I speak it with English accent. So everyone does laugh at me. Some people say Chinese accent, but but like, so everyone, I think that's, to be honest, that's a lot of Africa. So anytime I go anywhere in the continent, it's not where you from. They want to know where you're from in Africa, because everyone understands being obviously the black skin that, you know, whether you're from the Caribbean or you're going to be from Africa somewhere. So I don't actually get that at all. And, you know, to be honest, when I go, if I'm in Nigeria, I know how to turn it up like a Nigerian. Like, I will give it to them. When I'm in Kenya, so I know how to deal with people. So I don't really get that.
And the reason why I asked that is because, so I was also born here, to parents from Jamaica. Part of that whole, you know, Windrush thing. They came here in the mid-50s. And they had that typical background of leaving their kids or leaving their older children in Jamaica being looked at by grandparents or relatives, because they all thought they were coming here for 5 years and then going back. And then when they got here, they realised it wasn't going to be 5 years, it was going to be a hell of a lot longer. So I was born here, I've got another brother that was born here. We had 2 siblings that were born in Jamaica. They ended up coming here a bit later, in the 60s. My parents, so they always talk about their British children and their Jamaican children. And they see a difference between their English children and their Jamaican children, as they call it. They were fortunate enough to live their dream. They spent 25, 30 years here maybe, and they did go back. And when they went back, you know, their view was, oh, Jamaica's changed. It's changed so much, yeah. I'm sure Jamaica had changed a bit, but what had changed more probably was them. And they recognised when they went back, they weren't treated as true Jamaicans because they'd left. Even though they'd come back, they'd left. They're not true Jamaicans. When we go there, the British children, we're made and we're told we're not Jamaican, not true Jamaicans. We're Jamaicans, but we're not true. And there was like 3 classes of Jamaicans: those that never left, those that left but returned, and those that were born elsewhere but come back for vacation or whatever else. So I was just interested in.
It's interesting what you're saying, because probably we can pick on Gift, who had some upbringing in Nigeria. I think when we spoke a bit.
Yeah.
So what's your take on this then?
So my take in terms of myself is kind of similar. Like I personally feel like I am Nigerian. Like that's number one to me. But part of the reason why I do feel that way is because I was born here, but when I was a kid, I went back to Nigeria with my dad. So my dad is the one that put that culture in me in terms of me knowing, understanding from a very early age that I am Nigerian. And if anything, my dad actually left here to go to Nigeria for opportunities, which is weird because it's always the other way around. People normally leave Africa to come here to get more opportunities. But for my dad, he did the opposite, and it actually worked. So, so growing up in Nigeria, especially when you've lived in the UK for a good chunk of your life, and then going back to Nigeria, it was a massive culture shock for me, because like all I knew about Nigeria was maybe what your parents or your uncles would tell you or whatever. But going there, seeing even like the downfall buses, everything to me, the air, the energy, it was so brand new. And it took me a bit of time to kind of like get used to it all. But eventually I did. And if anything, people laugh at me at the time because of my accent. My accent right now is like a twang of Nigerian and being from there, living in London. By the time my accent was like strong, like people just knew, like people just looked at me and they just knew, like, yeah, you're not from here. Yeah. Like, I remember my first night sleeping when I was in Lagos, sleeping in Ikeja, like the mosquitoes, they didn't touch anyone else. It was only me. I had mosquito marks everywhere. I was like, what's going on my legs, to my arms, everything. And yeah, I just stood out like a sore thumb. But me going to that living in Nigeria, it really helped me so much, because I felt like I got to get in touch with my roots and my culture, exactly where I'm from. So I got to visit. I'm from Delta State. Yeah. So yeah, from my dad grew up in a village called Sapele. So I got to go there, see like my family, my culture, and everything. And it really gave me that background of, yeah, like this is who you are, and you should never forget that this is where you come from. So I always, like in anything I do, I always keep that in the back of my mind, that I am Nigerian, and I love being Nigerian. I love being African. I love being black. So yeah, so I always make sure in everything I do that I show my heritage and where I'm from. Yeah.
Yeah. So Chioma, I know you also come from a background where you've got African parents from Nigeria, and obviously we know Nigerian parents, the first generation, are the strict type, wanting to keep certain rules and regulations. Yeah. So how has that also been for you then?
I think it's been a gift. No pun intended.
That's great.
It's almost it's kind of a thing of pride that I carry around, to kind of know that. Well, I guess the history is something that I'm still learning. It's very rich, but just to know that I'm part of a community and what it represents, as much as the media might not necessarily portray the positivity of Nigeria in itself. But I think in terms of just being a Black British Nigerian, I think it's definitely helped me personally, just in my ability to convey a story, because you can only present something from your perspective. And of course, what I do in my day-to-day job is kind of like building a story through data and telling and giving it to a client and saying, okay, this is what you can do with this story. But then also being a creative storyteller, it's my story, it's my resilience, it's my perspective, it's my pain, it's my battles and blessings that I can coin together to be able to share that with the world. And I don't think that would have been as strong, I guess. I don't think I would have. I just think it's just my purpose to be Nigerian, if I'm just being succinct. I love it. I love the music. I love the the films. I'm a Nollywood babe. I don't know if you guys are into Nollywood, but I literally just watched a Nollywood film before I got here. I will watch 15 parts, no problem. And I know not everyone can do that, but I just love being Nigerian.
Yeah. So it's interesting hearing this. So I'm hearing that there was a heavy influence of first generation parents who really instilled, you know, the cultural values and sort of allowed you to have a taste of your heritage. Now, will we say that it will be the same, or is the same for second generation? Are they passing that same cultural nuance and sort of regard for heritage and things like the first? Will we say that's happening when it comes to second generation?
I think it depends on the family, really. And the parents that are raising you, because even if I look at my nephew, who's in his 20s, when I'm talking to him about certain cultural things, he's just like, what? Why do I have to do that? No, I don't get that. Like, it's not something that my sister has passed down. Right. But I know for me personally, that's really important. Right. I know that's something that I will instill within my children. So I actually really think it just depends on the family. I think actually it probably is more watered down, right? So, and I think that for me personally is the thing that is sad, is that as generations go and go, will people completely forget where they come from, ultimately? And I think that's also part of celebrating Black History Month, right? So people remember. People also kind of can hear stories. People, I remember for me, the first time, I went to an event many, many years ago, and that was the first time I heard all about King Leopold and Congo, and it blew my mind. I'd never been taught that, right? You don't get taught that kind of thing in the UK education system. So I think, months like this, yes, I understand the argument. It should be celebrated all year round. And I think, certain people do and certain groups do. But for me, these months are really important, especially for the younger generation, especially in schools, to really kind of identify and understand. And I get the point. It's always very much, Martin Luther King, everything else. Yeah. For me, those are great stories over there, but what's happening here? That's right. And what's that impact and the influence?
So, Wes, what would you say? Well, obviously, because we've got the African community, and then we also got the Caribbean heritage. How is it looking?
So I think you're absolutely right, Kezia. I think it's family by family, and that will be the main driver. I would say, probably safe to say, I'm probably the oldest person. So, and I think each generation that's come along at the different times have come into a different Britain. So certainly my parents, when they came in the 50s, the one we grew up ringing in our ears, and that generation telling us, this is not your country. This is not your country. This is the white man's country. And because they had this vision of only being here for a short period of time and going back, they were like, so, you keep your head down, you don't make a fuss, you don't, because this ain't for you. And I think for a while they honestly believed that, that we would not be staying here. So years on, when it's like, well, you get a little bit older, at first you hear all that and you take it all in, so you don't stand out, you don't make a fuss at school, you don't do this, you don't do that, But after a while you start thinking, hang on a minute, what do you mean this isn't my country? And it probably, again, came to a real realisation the first time we got taken to Jamaica. The British children got taken to Jamaica. I was 11, I think. And it was like a whoa moment, like you said when you went to Nigeria. Whoa. Well, first of all, it's all black people. Well, I've never seen this before, because we were so in the minority. So that's a big wake up. Wow, it's full of black people. And then you start to understand yourself a little bit more. So I think it was post that experience coming back and going, well, actually, much as I love Jamaica, but I do understand I am Jamaican. I've got that in my roots. I've got that in my blood. But culturally, 11 years of being in Britain and seeing Jamaica for 6 weeks or whatever it was there was a difference. So coming back here, it was like, well, that isn't home for me. My brother and my sister, it was definitely home for them. They felt it definitely wasn't home for me. My roots are there, definitely Jamaican through and through. But coming back here, it was then, well, what do you mean this isn't my country? Because if this isn't my country, and I don't think that's my country, where do I belong?
But to kind of add, sorry to cut you off, but to kind of add to what you said, Wes, is that I think sometimes we kind of, like, we always go by, this is a truth, this is a lie, it's this or it's that. Sometimes both things can be true. And I feel like we're now living in an age where for a lot of people, especially like our generation, both things are true. Like Nigeria is my country, but at the same time, I am British. This is also my country too. So so both things, they go parallel, they go hand in hand.
Absolutely. I think we are blessed that we've got both cultures, and we can lean into both, and we understand both, and that whole business, and it was a really big, to be told most of your life, well, all of your life until a certain point, this is not your country. Your parents are telling you that. The racists are telling you that. So again, that moment when you think, well, hang on a minute, it is, and I've got to make my way in this world, and I've got to start standing up for myself, and I've got to stop trying to be invisible, and stop trying to fit in, and stop seeing myself as being other. That's that's a big leap after years and years and years of that indoctrination.
Yeah.
Now, I tell that to, you know, your generation, and, you know, you're coming into a different Britain in a different time when, you know, nobody's telling you this ain't your country. Nobody's telling you.
I mean, sometimes.
Well, sometimes, yeah.
Well, I get.
I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a lot of it,
So, in the same way that, you know, my parents' generation put up with a lot of stuff, right? That my generation didn't put up with. My children's generation definitely ain't going to put up with what I put up with, and neither should they. So we're all building on what's gone before and standing on each other's shoulders to. And yeah, I think there's.
Would you say your children's confidence is based on the fact that they've got a father that they can see who's a professional? Would you actually would that be?
Look, yeah, it wasn't about my dad. My dad was a bus driver, yeah. But it wasn't the fact that he was a bus driver. That it was what he believed. He believed this wasn't his country. He was just here as a migrant worker. My children don't hear anything like that from me, because where else, you know, they're taught about where they're from. They're taught about their grandparents and their great grandparents, and they've been there and they've experienced that. But they're very much they wouldn't hold with the stuff that I believed for that period of my life.
There's something that you said about belonging, right? And maybe, I don't know, like share my gift, because I definitely know, and I think, as you're rightly say, as the generations going, my mum came back in the 80s, and it was very much like, you're going to do this, we're here, you're going to make an impact. Like, I mean, it's a very typical, very different to like Nigerian. Nigerians are like, you know, you're going to conquer the world. You know, as South Africans are quite, you know, laid back about that. But but there was a moment in my life, there was a point where I was really confused about where do I belong, because I know that I've got this amazing heritage, but equally as well, like, I was born here, I grew up here, I used to go back on holiday, but a lot of it was quite alien to me. I lived here, but I knew that I was different from my friends, and I think, you know, I grew up in a time as well, and I really remember this vividly, where it wasn't cool to be African, right? It really wasn't. So actually, the people that were really kind of like, I guess, throwing stones or saying a lot were the Caribbeans, right? In terms of being Africa. So it was just kind of like, where do I belong? I don't quite belong here. I don't quite belong there. Where do I? And I think, and that's what I'd love to hear from you guys. Like, if you see, if you kind of went through something similar, or wondering if that's changing within as we go on through the generations as well.
I will say perfectly, because that's kind of the angle I was gonna come in from, was because like when I lived in Nigeria, then I came back in 2010. I came back to London in 2010, so I was 16 at the time. Give my age away. but I was 16 at the time, and I remember when I first came back. So because I'd lived in Nigeria for so many years, of course my accent was more like, it was very Nigerian. Like, it was very, very Nigerian. It was like, so when I came back and like I speak to certain people, I just remember people like sometimes laughing at my accent, or there was this whole thing about being an African booty scratcher and all this and all this weird stuff. I just remember thinking, luckily enough, I've just always had a strong skin and I can always dish it back. Right. So if someone says something back to me, I was always witty enough to come up with something funny that would make the whole room laugh. So that kind of helped me in terms of like me being able to cope with it. But I remember coming back thinking, wow, like this is actually crazy, because some of the people doing that, like I'll understand if it was someone that wasn't from, that they have the same skin, same background as me, but it was black people who their parents are even from Africa, from Nigeria, saying these things to me. And I just didn't understand how that correlation. But over time, as I got older, so 16, so when I started college, and then when I was moving, I was getting to like 17, 18, like I just kind of saw a change. And for me, it started with music, weirdly enough. I think it really started with music. So when like when it became cool to be African was when I started seeing artists like Wizkid. Like the band, I think the band was maybe the first artist that I think for me that kind of broke that mold between Nigeria and like the international and the UK, because they had like Why Me and they had Oliver Twist and all of that. And then I think people started appreciating the culture a lot more. Then we started seeing it in more like media, films, and they just seemed to be. I don't really know where it stemmed from, but they just seemed to be as I was approaching 18, there seemed to be this like movement, somewhat uprising of people then being proud to be African, and I loved it. And it just so over time it just gradually changed. But I also feel like the reason why I experienced that was that there was a bit of immaturity. So of course, if you think about it, like when you're 16, what do you really know? Like we're all kids. Like there was a bit of immaturity there. So I could put it down to that. But it just seems like over time, when people start becoming more knowledgeable about Africa, people start realizing, like, do you know what, people in Africa are not suffering? Like, there are people in Africa that are living, like you said, that are living amazingly, eating good. They can afford to fly anywhere in the world. And I think as the education of Africa and people started knowing more about it in my like generation or my group of growing up, people started welcoming it and people started appreciating it, and it's going to the point where even like people wanted to know more about their roots. People started traveling more back home now that they're older. So it kind of changed. But when I came back at first, it was definitely, I feel like, it was definitely still, there's a stigma being African or sounding a certain way. But over time, it changed, which I think is great. Because I like to think about it now. If I was 16 now and I came back, because I have my younger brother, that's a question I would like to ask him. Like, is it, how are people approaching you being, like saying like you're from Nigeria? How do people approach that? I don't really know. But from my point of view, I feel like people are now more aware, which is a good thing.
Yeah. No, but I definitely think it's easy to kind of perpetuate false ideologies, I guess, especially in a digital age, even so now, because people just carry the baton off of what other people have said, and very few aren't kind of impressionable in the sense where they have their own thoughts at a young age. But I can definitely attest to what you've mentioned. there were kids that came from Togo or Nigeria, you know, that didn't get the best treatment, I guess. A lot of them, funny enough, use music as an outlet as well. And that's something that's definitely been an outlet for a lot of people in our community. But I do think that, I don't know where I keep harping on about the video. I guess they do have kind of a role to play, but I think it's also upbringing as well. I think a lot of people are kind of, I think a lot of it's brought down from parents as well. And maybe it's not as overt as explicitly saying, okay, these people are like this, these people are like that, but children do observe what they see. I'm now beginning to, from what you've just shared and what Wesley and Keziah have just shared in terms of two different generations, I'm now looking at what we are seeing as the urban culture and what we call the UK black culture. So what are some of the things that you think are really inspiring this whole new cultural move? Urban culture, we're seeing a lot more Afrocentric fashion or whatever it is that you want to call it. Do you think that urban culture is still being influenced heavily now by this new UK black culture?
I think inevitably it has to. Look, most of the ills of this world, wherever you are, is born out of ignorance. And when people don't know, they don't know. So the more people live together side by side, cheek by jowl, they learn about each other's cultures and they realise the richness, the differences aren't there to be mocked or ridiculed. The differences are there to learn and to share and to celebrate. And I think that's what's happening. And, you know, the point between West Indians and Africans, absolutely that was a big thing. You know, they're Africans. We're West Indians.
That's how it's changed.
Oh yeah, the other way round.
West Indians are like, so I choose my heritage.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I definitely feel that way.
Absolutely.
It's definitely,
but again, I come back to that was born out of ignorance. If I think about some of the things my parents used to say, or their views on Africans, because why? Because they were educated in the British system. It was in Jamaica, but their education was British. It was exactly what Britons were being taught. So, and that when I say my parents are ignorant, I don't mean they ill-educated, but they were only educated to a level, and they didn't know anything else. And how could they? And it wasn't until they started mixing more with people, that they started challenging everything that they'd ever been taught.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No, I think for a lot of people, popular culture is their go-to for
Yeah.
knowledge. Just Twitter, it's
Yeah.
it's instant access. It's very few actually go the extra mile to learn about these things. But I do think there are, I guess, thought processes that need to be unlearned. But that takes intentionality and I guess, a strong head to say that there's more than just what's being shown here.
Yeah, I definitely agree too, because I would say for me, for us, what's now kind of changing it is, I would say like that the social media aspect, I think, is really like educating people a lot more, like, because like we've kind of come from that generation, weirdly enough, where we can remember life without the internet, kind of like we know what it was like to use a dial-up phone, but we're like the first ones to start get into social media. So because I remember when Facebook was like, it just became the in thing. I think at the time I had to be like 14-ish. I was about 14. And I remember when YouTube was like booming. So I feel like I was like the first one to start with like social media, like open a YouTube account, going on Facebook and stuff like that. And I feel like the benefit of social media kind of came through because people from all over the world could then learn more about different cultures that maybe they were intrigued about or they didn't know about. And to somewhat degree, I feel like in my sort of generation, people I grew up with, it kind of helped with their ignorance in terms of they started learning and they started realizing like, actually, like, even if we're different, we're still humans, we're still the same. And I can appreciate your difference and I can see you for who you are as a person and a human. So like, so as social media started developing and growing, and like you said, Twitter then came in, and people really started putting their points of views, YouTube with videos. And like I said, for me, music was like a big thing. Like people started enjoying Nigerian music, African music, and even to sports, like you were saying, a lot of athletes, like when I first came, people would talk about J.J. Okocha, Kanu, like you were saying Nigerians, like that were actually like well-respected people. People started, I feel like, that's when I really started noticing like the change of how people approach me, being Nigerian and speaking to me, and not making me feel bad, making me feel down for being or living in Africa or Nigeria. So I think the media, the social media bit, people taking that power into their own hands and spreading their own information instead of, for example, like a CNN doing it or Sky News, because at the end of the day, as much as those media companies try to show everything, they're somewhat agenda. I was trying to be nice. They're somewhat agenda driven. So once people have had that power in their hands to say, I'm living in Nigeria, we have internet over. The fact that someone in Nigeria can even post a tweet or a video, use Facebook alone, to some people is like, how is this even possible? So that alone is already curbing them that ignorance and giving them that education. Yeah, that was lacking.
It's interesting because I'm just sitting here thinking, it looks like social media has given us that voice for us to celebrate our heritage. And we're talking about Black History Month. Why is it being celebrated in a month? But literally, we've got social media really to push out Black stories, Black history throughout the year. And I'm sure, Kazaya, you'll agree with me. Year of because in Ghana we what was it? Was it 2020 to celebrate the Year of Return? And this Year of Return literally started off with just having a group of influencers flying into Accra and just filming themselves having fun. And that just went viral. And because of that, we had the biggest...
Go Accra too. It looks beautiful. Like, I probably came across some of that. I've never been, but from what I saw from it, like I was like, oh man, this looks so great. Like,
and to even add on to, I'm now seeing more and more even people with Black British experience traveling into African or Caribbean and now filming themselves, celebrating the culture, telling the heritage story from that point of view. Now, I'm just sitting here and thinking, where is that influence coming from? Is it because now they've literally bought into the idea that this is where I'm coming from, I'm proud of it, and I really want to celebrate and share it?
I mean, it's partly, they do say word of mouth is the best marketing tool, right? So if you see someone that you know in Ghana or somewhere in Africa or whatever, Tanzania, whatever, and like you said with that campaign, and you see them having a good time, and you have a crush, you're gonna be like you want to know more. You just want to know more and experience more. So I think that word of mouth of people, us, because that's the thing about social media right now. It just feels like everyone right now has their own voice to say exactly what they want to say and put the message out exactly how it should be. So what's really happening is that people are now getting to really see the truth.
Right.
And that's part of the reason why I feel like so many people right now are in positions where they feel comfortable to want to even travel to these places, because they're seeing the truth that going to Ghana is not a bad thing. Like, you can go to Ghana, have a good time, and get back home safely. Compared to someone else spouting lies or seeing like, you know, one thing that I always use that I feel like they always portrayed Africa with is with the charities, where they show the kids, no, there's not enough water, we need to build this house, and the flies on the kid's eye, and you're watching the video like the kid's not even blinking, and it just looks terrible.
To be honest, that's what I believed
it's just
as a
like,
kid, right? Until I went to Ghana, like, I think the first time from when I was really young, I went back, it was like 11. I was just like, is this your house? It was like literally 5 times the size of mine when I was living at home. And that was what I was expecting to see. What I was seeing on those TV adverts, what I was seeing on the news, that's what I was expecting to see. And I think to that point, like, social media, and yes, you probably say I would say this, but for me, social media has really just enabled people to have direct access, right, to see for themselves, to experience. So you don't no longer need to rely on CNN or a Daily Mail or whatever to really understand what a country looks like, what the people are like. You can actually experience it yourself or see other people experiencing it. And I think, you know, the Year of the Return thing was great for Ghana, but it just continues. And, you know, that's going to happen all across Africa, to be honest with you, because people are now seeing, like, I remember, you know, actually on that flight when I was 11, I remember seeing a load of Rastafarians, West Indians, like on the plane. And I was just like, oh. And unbeknown to me, actually, there was a lot who were migrating back to live in, like, Rita Marley lives in Ghana, like, you know, who were migrating. No one knew about that because social media wasn't the big thing then. But now, with social media, everyone is seeing that. So everyone's like, oh, if it's good for Rita Marley, if it's good for this, then I can do it as well.